Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through sources to pull out the key insights, basically giving you a shortcut to understanding complex topics. Today, we're looking at this pretty detailed report called Why Elon Musk's America Party is a Doomed Venture. Our goal is to unpack why it argues this venture is likely to fail, looking at the big hurdles for any third party in the U.S. Okay, let's dive in.
Yeah, and this report, it's interesting because it doesn't just say it'll fail. It really breaks down the systemic reasons, the baked-in obstacles that make it so tough for someone like Musk, even with all his, visibility. It points to some really formidable barriers.
Okay, so the first big one it tackles is just the fundamental structure of U.S. politics, the two-party system. How deep does that resistance go, according to the report?
Well, it's really fascinating, and kind of the starting point is how the design itself makes it tough, like first past the post voting, winner takes all. The report argues this basically forces voters toward one of the two main parties. Voting third party often feels like throwing your vote away, or worse, being a spoiler.
Right, the spoiler effect. We hear that a lot.
Exactly. It actively discourages people.
Okay.
And then you add the Electoral College on top of that.
Yeah.
Well, the report makes a stark point. No third-party president in, over 160 years?
Wow, 160 years.
Expect.
Yeah, that's a wall. But couldn't you argue that maybe Musk, with his, massive online reach, could kind of bypass some of that? Does the report touch on whether that changes the game?
It argues the structure is just incredibly rigid, even with that reach. Things like gerrymandering, drawing districts to lock in one party may, and closed primaries where only registered party members can vote. These make it almost impossible for an outsider to gain ground in most places.
So even getting attention doesn't necessarily translate to winning seats or votes where it counts.
Pretty much. The system sort of channels everything back to the two main players.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, a party could navigate those big structural issues. The report then brings up this other huge hurdle getting on the ballot. It calls it a legal minefield. What does that actually involve?
Oh, it's a beast. Every state is different, first off. Different rules, different deadlines, often incredibly burdensome. You need signatures, sometimes hundreds of thousands of them. That takes a huge organization, lots of money, volunteers.
Just managing that across 50 states sounds like a nightmare.
It is. And then there are filing fees, legal challenges. It requires this massive coordinated machine just to get your name listed.
And I imagine the existing parties aren't just sitting back watching this happen. Does the report mention how they react?
Definitely. It says they're anything but passive. The Democrats and Republicans, they actively litigate. They challenge signatures. They file lawsuits to try and keep third parties off the ballot.
Okay, so it's not just bureaucratic hurdles, it's active opposition.
Exactly. The report basically predicts Musk's party, if it really tries, will be bogged down in court battles and dealing with missed deadlines long before people even vote.
Okay, so structure, legal hurdles. What about the actual message, the ideas? Does the report see a coherent vision for this America Party?
This is where the report gets really critical. It basically describes the whole thing as vague and incoherent. There's no real cohesive political philosophy presented. It's more just generalized anti-establishment talk.
Anti-establishment, but without a clear alternative.
Kind of. Musk's own public statements, the report notes, swing wildly, from pro-free speech absolutism to aligning with certain right-wing figures, then turning around and criticizing Trump's spending. It's all over the place.
So what does that mean for actually attracting voters? If the message is confusing, who does it appeal to?
Well, the core point the report makes is pretty sharp. Voters don't rally behind billionaires, generally. They rally behind ideas, behind movements, and the argument is Musk doesn't really have either. Without that clear ideology, that thing people can grab onto and identify with, the report basically calls it a vanity project. Lacks substance.
Right, which leads to Musk himself. He's obviously achieved incredible things in business, Tesla, SpaceX. Does that translate to politics? What's the report's take on his background?
It draws a really clear line. Musk is a tech visionary, a CEO, but he's not a political strategist. He's not been an elected official. He's not, connected to the machinery of governing or grassroots organizing. Running Tesla isn't the same as building a national party. Politics needs different skills.
Like what, specifically?
Things like community organizing, building coalitions with different groups, recruiting good candidates, having a disciplined media strategy. The report suggests these aren't really his strengths or focus.
And his approach seems more reliant on, ex posts and polls.
Exactly. And the report kind of contrasts that with the hard, on-the-ground work needed. Social media gets attention, sure, but it doesn't build the necessary infrastructure. It's more megaphone than foundation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's his public persona, his behavior online. Could that actually hurt his political chances?
The report argues it's a major liability. He's become quite polarizing, right? With the conspiracy theory stuff, sometimes the online arguments, the attacks on media or other institutions. That kind of thing tends to alienate the moderates and independents you'd need to build a broad base.
And the impulsiveness. Buying Twitter, the brain chips. Does that play into it?
It does. The report mentions that kind of erratic behavior signals, well, unreliability to voters. Politics often values stability and predictability, even if it seems boring sometimes.
Plus, there's that potential contradiction, a multi-billionaire running on grievance politics. Does that land well?
The report suggests it undercuts credibility. It bluntly says, for every really loyal fan, there are probably dozens more people who see him as maybe self-serving or unstable. That perception gap is huge.
So putting this all together, history hasn't been kind to these kinds of efforts, has it? What does the report say about past billionaire third-party attempts?
Yeah, history provides some pretty stark warnings.
Yeah.
The report brings up several examples. Ross Perot, of course. Huge splash in 92, 19% of the vote.
But zero electoral votes.
Zero electoral votes. And the Reform Party eventually fizzled. Then there was Howard Schultz, the Starbucks guy, floated an independent run, got immediate backlash, never really launched.
I remember that. Didn't last long.
Nope. Andrew Yang's Forward Party got buzzed, but hasn't shown much real-world traction. And, well, Kanye West's birthday party.
Okay. Yeah, that was something else.
Described in the report as absurd and unserious.
So the overall conclusion from history is pretty damning. Money buys attention, sure, but the report says it doesn't buy legitimacy, votes, or staying power.
So even if it's likely doomed, as the report argues, could it still have an impact, maybe a negative one?
That's a really important angle the report covers. Even in failure, it could cause problems, like splitting votes.
The spoiler effect again.
Exactly. It could siphon off votes from one of the major candidates and potentially help the other one win, even if that person is unpopular overall. Depends on who Musk draws from, if anyone. It could also just trivialize politics, turn elections into celebrity sideshows rather than debates about actual issues. And maybe just add to the cynicism, making politics seem like just memes and Twitter polls.
Yeah, the report warns about that. It might not change who's in government, but it could further erode people's faith in government, in the democratic process itself, which is concerning.
So wrapping it all up, what's the final verdict from this report?
The final verdict is pretty unambiguous. It calls the America Party less a real political movement and more a tech billionaire's frustration cosplay. That's the quote.
Wow, frustration cosplay, okay.
Yeah. It reiterates the core problems. No real structure, no clear message, no strategy, not enough public trust. And it argues Musk just fundamentally underestimates the institutional barriers in U.S. politics.
So the prediction is, footnote, punchline.
Pretty much. More likely to be a footnote or a punchline than any kind of real force for change. And it ends with a provocative thought. Unless the actual goal is chaos, not reform, then this whole thing is just a foolish misadventure destined for irrelevance. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What kind of change actually helps democracy? And do these kinds of celebrity-driven things push us forward or backward?
Definitely a lot to chew on there. A very sobering analysis based on that report. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it gave you some food for thought. Until next time.